because I was on a call with a listener who was applying to be in my consulting multifamily program, and he said that everything I do turns to gold, and that he knows that I don't make big mistakes. I'm like, where the hell did you get that from? And I said, I guess I need to be more, put more emphasis on my mistakes, because, man, I'm making them every single day, and I'm making big ones every week, and even larger ones every year. So I think it will be important to give some perspective and context for the good stuff that's going on in the business, but then also sprinkling in on a consistent basis what mistakes I'm making, and you've got mistakes too that we're going to come up and share. So the mistake of the week for me is the Tony Hawk video.
You're feature pacing there. You'll be interviewing him soon.
Exactly. We are in talks with Tony Robbins, one of his publicists, to be on the show. The Tony Hawk interview went live on Thursday of today.
I think it went live yesterday.
It went live yesterday.
So on Wednesday of this week.
Wednesday of this week, yeah. This week. It went live this week. And it was, so I interviewed Emmitt Smith. I thought that went really well. I thought that was a great interview. One piece of feedback I got from someone was it was all roses and sunshine and ponies and pigtails. Perhaps ask about what's a flop that you had. And I had that in my questions. I didn't ask. I should have. And so moving forward, I will make sure I ask that to these high-profile people who I'm interviewing. So I thought that went well, though, overall. But Tony Hawk, I thought I was too prepared for, and I actually had too many prepared questions that I wanted to ask him, and I did too much research. And I didn't think that interview flowed well. And it was not his fault, it was my fault. I will also say that my calendar got really packed that day, as it usually does. And one of the things I did, and I never do this, is that I met with an investor at a bar right around the corner. I rode my bike to the bar, had a beer, had a Miller Lite, and then rode my bike back home to my office where I record the podcast. And, so I had one beer in me as well. And I'm not a lightweight, right? I can handle more than one beer, but at the same time, I don't know if that influenced my direction at all. I just didn't feel like I did a good job, and the reason why was I was over-prepared. So the lesson is that sometimes what you've been doing and how you've been preparing for future people is the same way you should prepare for someone else. And I guess that's the interview specific. Let me make it more broad. Trust your instincts. Have the baseline knowledge that you need, but then trust your instincts. I guess that's what it boils down to. And that goes with people. When you're interviewing team members, have a process that works, but then ultimately go with your gut and common sense versus trying to force fit a process into something, because ultimately when you do that, it's a mechanical object versus a fluid, dynamic piece of art that you're wanting to do. And so that can be applied on when you look at deals and interview team members, etc.
Yeah, I took that Dale Carnegie public speak. It was just called Dale Carnegie course, but it was a lot about communicating. And one of the rules that they had was never script out a speech, like never have exactly what you're going to say and memorize it, because then while you're giving your speech, you're just going to be like in your mind, just like thinking, okay, like what's the next word I'm going to say? And it seems kind of like what you're saying too, that you were very rehearsed and you had like all the questions prepared beforehand, that you weren't able to kind of like go off script a little bit. And that was, a big piece of advice that I learned from Dale Carnegie, because before I always thought, you just script everything and, very structured so you don't mess up or it doesn't, go off course. But in reality, especially in an interview format, that's kind of what you want to have happen, because if you ask a question here and then you jump to something completely random, you might have been able to get something else out of that. But when I actually listened to your interview, I thought it was very cool that you know, some of the questions you asked and how you like, you know, how you asked him about like the 900 spin and how, you know, he said also, you know, so you knew that, but then you also knew that he talked about that and said that it was, you know, more mental than physical, and so you kind of like built off of that. So I thought that was really cool, and if you looked at his face, like, oh wow, this guy was prepared. So I mean, maybe you over prepared this time, but I think it still has the positive, showing that you came into this ready to ask a bunch of questions that no one else would have asked.
Yeah, so. Yeah, I appreciate it. I think the questions that were good, but I didn't do a good job of, once I asked a question, being in tune with the conversation enough where I could then follow up and dig in a little bit into what his responses were. It was more surface level. I had prepared questions. He answered them, and I moved on to the next one. And that's the stuff that I need to bring to the table that's better. And so there you go. So what's your mistake?
Well, before the mistake, something else that you were saying about you talking about mistakes. Now someone asks you, hey Joe, you don't ever make any mistakes. Like it's crazy. I think it was show 991. It was about how to be a guru, is what the episode was entitled, and essentially the person was saying how anyone who has any experience as a real estate investor could be a quote unquote guru, but the type of guru she was talking about was someone that literally uses their mistakes and like monetizes them. And so what they'll do is they'll have a consulting program or give talks or do whatever, where they focus on the mistakes that they made and talk about, no, this is a problem, this is the issue that I ran into, you're going to run into this issue too, here's how I overcame it, and that's really all you do. I thought that was interesting, because she was also talking about how, you know, the gurus that people may not necessarily, I wouldn't say not like, but don't get as much value from, are the ones that always talk about like the good and never talk about the bad, which is why I think it's good that we're going to talk about mistakes on Fall on Friday, but also for your podcast, you know, every single podcast you ask, what's your biggest mistake? And they always go into some sort of mistake that they made, so people know that everything is not going to go smoothly in real estate. So I wanted to mention that.
Henceforth, we will have a mistake that each of us has made the previous week. And it's not about mentioning this. I talked to Theo about this before the show. It's not about just mentioning a mistake. It's about, as you just said, what did we learn from it, and how can that be applied for every listener who could come across that similar situation.
Yeah. So my mistake is very specific. It's not as broad as Joe's was, but I was I'm currently under contract for 3 4-unit properties, so 12 units total, and I was doing the inspections last week, and we walked through every single unit, and some of the tenants were home, some of them weren't. And for the tenants that were home,
you call them tenants or residents?
I call them residents now. They were home, and they asked me who I was. And I said I was the owner, or I plan on buying the properties. And I mean,
because it felt good at the time. You're like, I'm the one buying these properties.
Yeah, exactly. It did feel pretty good.
You got a little ego hit,
I did,
or a little ego boost rather.
Yep. And so I did that, and one of the tenants, one of the residents, instantly went into this story about their lives. And this guy was like, I live in this apartment. I've been living here for this many years. The reason I moved here is because my last apartment burned down, and I had all this custom German furniture that all was gone, and now I don't need anything. Now I just sleep on my couch, and I've got a picture of my wife up there who died 20 years ago, and I can't wait to see her again. I got cancer and all this stuff, and I was sympathized with him like a lot, but I walked away, and I remember I looked at Marcel, and I was like, I guess we can't kick this guy out, we can't raise his rent, like we can't do anything here because we're so emotionally attached to this guy now. And so I guess the moral, the takeaway that I got, without trying to sound too cold, because again, at the end of the day, it is an investment, but I also want to take care of your residents, and we're not going to raise this guy's rent. But at the end of the day, I realized that when I'm visiting these properties moving forward, when I meet the rest of the residents, I'm not going to tell them that I'm the actual owner of the property. I'm going to say I work for the management company, or I'm someone else, and I report to the owner. And I just intuitively, that makes a lot more sense, because they're not going to tell a sob story to the property manager because he doesn't really have any control. Or if they do, I can just say, I'm the manager. I don't have control of it. But also, I feel as if they're going to communicate with you differently if they know you own the property versus just some random guy that manages it.
And if you are buying it with your girlfriend's not as strong of a word as we need, but I mean Marcella's you two are together. You are basically reporting to her. So
there you go, perfect.
you do report to the owner.
So I'm not lying.
You're not lying. Exactly. And applying this for other aspects from a negotiation standpoint, when you find yourself in a negotiation, it's always better to say, well, I don't have the authority, but I can talk to someone who does. That way, for the most part, there's exceptions, but for the most part, it's good because then you don't feel pressure to agree to whatever they're asking for at that moment, and then you can go back and renegotiate. That's what I remember when I was in advertising, trying to get a higher salary. I was talking to the CFO of the company, and he's like, "Well, I don't have the control to do." I'm thinking, come on, man. Yeah, you do. You're the CFO. But that's just something that has can help. And similarly, the property manager could say the same thing about, well, I don't control XYZ. I have to talk to the owner, and you have to report into Marcella. So it kind of works out.
And I think like as investors, you understand that, well, the property manager does kind of maybe have some control, but for them, it's kind of for the residents. I think once they hear that, they realize you're not the owner. I think it just diffuses the situation. They're not going to ask you certain questions or demand certain things based off of that. So,
cool.
So that's 2 mistakes you guys got for today to learn from.